Let's go back to this supposed crash out by Karp on CNBC. It was nothing of the sort. It was all these legacy media types making that claim. And that's the first clue that he's actually saying something insightful and maybe kind of brilliant. And I think the thing that he said that I hadn't really thought about in quite those terms is he started talking about AI safety in the enterprise and what that really looks like. And what he said is that what technical customers want is control over their compute, their models, their data stack, and their alpha, meaning their proprietary knowledge. They want to know they own the means of production, he said, and it's not being transferred to someone else. And what he's referring to there is that these enterprises are at risk of transferring their knowledge, their know-how, their trade secrets, their customer data to these model providers who might eventually decide to compete with them, like you said, JCal. And you can see that enterprises are waking up to this threat and they're not happy about it. And I think Karp is exactly right about that. Now, I think this is a really interesting take on AI safety, because what safety means for an enterprise is, again, that they get to control their own data, their model weights, their compute. So a frontier lab can't hoover up their proprietary knowledge, their alpha, and turn it into their next product. And if you don't think that can happen, just look at what happened to Figma. So according to the information, Anthropic, quote unquote, blindsided its then business partner with the launch of Claude Design. So this was a new vertical app that Anthropic launched to compete in the design category. And Figma's founder said that Anthropic had not been completely honest with them. Anthropic's chief product officer had actually even served on Figma's board and didn't resign until 3 days before the launch of Claude Design. So obviously, Figma, again, felt blindsided by this. And you can see the resulting impact on their stock price. Figma's stock has fallen something like 50% this year, while Anthropic's valuation has surged. This is not an isolated example. Anthropic has also launched Claude Science, Claude Security, Claude Legal, Claude Financial, and of course, Claude Code. And every single one of these vertical apps expanded into categories that was previously served by companies building on top of Anthropic's own models. And really, if you want to go back to when Anthropic's revenue explosion began, it was with the launch of Claude Code. And how did they know to launch that product? Because they saw that Cursor was doing extremely well. Cursor was one of their biggest customers. They created the coding assistant first. They created that category. And Anthropic said, oh, like, why don't we vertically integrate? So in other words, they're watching where the value is being created on top of their models. Then they're moving in directly. And this is a formula that I think is very Microsoft-like. You could say it's very Google-like. They want to dominate the model layer. You could call that the operating system, and then use that position, that monopolistic position, to capture the most lucrative verticals. So if you want to think about like the Microsoft example, they had the Windows monopoly, and then systematically they went and dominated every lucrative category of business software. It started with spreadsheets and word processing, and then eventually it went to the browser, so forth and so on. If you want to look at Google, they basically had a monopoly or dominant position in search. And if you go back to the early days of Google, the search results kicked you off site. And in fact, they really prided themselves on how quickly they could send you off site. But gradually over time, they used that traffic to tell themselves where to build properties. And today, fewer than half of searches kick you off site. You stay on Google properties. And I think something similar is happening with Anthropic here. The pattern is clear. They are going to use their dominant position in the model to then grab more and more territory in any interesting and lucrative vertical. So again, back to Alex Karp's point, if you're an enterprise customer or a developer, why in the world would you ever want to share any proprietary data with them? You are mortgaging your future. You are sealing your fate. You are going to lead to disaster for your company. Just one last point, and then I'll turn it over to JCal, is that Dario, at the same time that they pursue this business strategy, has been arguing that open source models are dangerous and need to be restricted. Well, dangerous to whom? Not to enterprises that want to retain control over their data. It's dangerous to his business model, because his business model requires that customers don't have a lot of choice at the model layer. And what Karp is pointing out here is that if you want to have true AI safety as an enterprise, you have to retain the ability to choose at the model layer who gets to see and use your alpha.